I'm back in Independence, Missouri. Very historic place. You know, I did those Oregon Trail videos from start to finish, and this was where it all started. This is kind of like the center point for a whole bunch of the different historic trails across America. But today we're here at the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum. You can check that out. We'll also see what other Harry S. Truman landmarks and sites there are around Independence. But let's start with the museum and see what it's all about. The Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum is the presidential library and resting place, obviously, of Harry S. Truman, the 33rd President of the United States from 1945 to 1953. His wife Bess and daughter Margaret are also interred here. It was the first presidential library created under the provisions of the 1955 Presidential Libraries Act. It's one of 13 libraries administered by the National Archives and Record Administration. So, interesting little video to get started.
Vice President Truman said,
"If American democracy is to survive, Germany and Japan must be defeated in battle, and thereby cost to respect the rights of other nations."
surface units of the Pacific Fleet are bombarding Iwo Jima. Aircraft of the strategic airport are now attacking military targets in and around Tokyo.
The operations of the Allies on all fronts have now brought the German war to its final stage. There was a time when we continue fighting till the final count. We know our enemy well. We must expect him to fight hard to save our lives.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. President Roosevelt is dead. The president died of a cerebral hemorrhage. All we know so far is that the president died
An era has come to an end. For us, it is more like the death of a father than of an official.
This nation has suffered this day a staggering loss. Vice President Harry Truman, who from here on will be President Truman, went immediately to the White House.
The gravest question mark in every American heart is about Truman. Can he swing the job? And despite his limited capabilities, I think he can.
He comes into office almost unknown to the people at large, and they will await with great anxiety the result of the test that he has to meet.
It would be foolish to pretend that President Truman possesses the qualities of leadership needed by the nation at the moment.
That was definitely interesting to see what people thought of Truman as he was taking office. As with most presidential libraries that I've been to, they start with telling the story of his life, with his childhood life and what he did growing up. And so that's no different in this one. So the library is built with private funds raised by the Harry Truman Library Incorporated, with Truman himself contributing greatly to the fundraising efforts, attending dinners, making speeches around the country, and writing thousands of letters. Land was donated by the City of Independence, dedicated July 6, 1957. They had former President Herbert Hoover was there. He was the only living former president other than Truman at that time, which is interesting. Chief Justice Earl Warren and former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt were also present when they had the dedication. Lyndon B. Johnson, when he was president, signed the Medicare Act here in 1965. So definitely some interesting things here. There's a bunch of letters he wrote to his wife on display. Obviously, back then there was no email. Well, so they were sending letters when they were apart. So the lead architect of this project was named Edward Neild of Louisiana. Truman had picked him in the 1930s during his time as a judge in Jackson County to design the renovation of the old courthouse that we'll show you later in the video. Neild also was one of the architects of the reconstruction of the White House during Truman's presidency. So that famous date right there, that's when Roosevelt passed away and Truman would have taken over the presidency as the 33rd president. Obviously a lot of doubt of Truman's capabilities, if he was going to be a good president or not.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin from CBS World News. A press association has just announced that President Roosevelt is dead. The president died of a cerebral hemorrhage.
I like this part of the museum. It was kind of a timeline on each side of the wall as you go through the years and important things that happened during his presidency. Obviously, there was a lot of war during Truman's time, from 45, basically inheriting World War II, but other wars that started and ended and started and ended again during that time. A lot of good audio-visual type stuff here. You can see that globe. It has different videos played on it. And there's even stuff inside the globe.
News has reached him that Jewish leaders plan to declare independence as soon as the British leave. Their militias are the strongest forces on the ground. They see no need to ask permission from the White House or from the UN. But it's clear to him that Truman favors recognition. Seizing on Clifford's role as Truman's key campaign advisor, he concludes that this push is a ploy to capture Jewish votes in the upcoming election. Angered, he snaps at Truman.
If in the election I was to vote, I would vote against the president.
This is a 6-minute long video here that I recorded. So if you want to fast forward through some of it, feel free. But it is pretty interesting. They use a lot of audio-visual in here as well.
This is the news for which the whole Allied world has been waiting. East and West have met. Nazi Germany has been split clean in half.
Victory. But what will victory bring? After 6 years of brutal war, Europe lies in ruins. Its people are starving, and President Truman finds himself at the head of a crumbling alliance. The threat of Nazi Germany has forced the United States and the Soviet Union into an uneasy partnership. But how long can this alliance last? Truman is troubled as Russia begins exerting control over Eastern Europe. But he won't risk sparking World War III. At the Potsdam Conference, he attempts to contain Soviet ambitions at the negotiating table, but fails. Within months of the conference, the Soviet Union installs communist governments in Albania and Poland. Bulgaria and Hungary seem poised to fall as well. Former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill issues a grim warning.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
Some of the president's advisors urge him to take a harder line. Truman agrees. When he appoints General George Marshall as his new Secretary of State, he knows Marshall, a tough, practical war hero, understands the consequences of letting communism go unchecked. In Turkey, the Soviets are pressuring the cash-strapped government, and in Greece, communist guerrillas are gaining ground in a bloody civil war. Truman and Marshall seize the opportunity to challenge Soviet aggression. Truman goes before Congress to convince the nation to get into the fight, but not militarily.
I therefore ask the Congress.
He asks for financial support for Greece and Turkey. He then urges America to embrace its role as a world leader, defending democracy wherever it's threatened.
The free peoples of the world look to us for support in maintaining their freedom. If we falter in our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world, and we shall surely endanger the welfare of this nation.
The Truman Doctrine, as it comes to be known, is a bold new foreign policy, one that sends a clear message to Russia. Wherever you push, we push back. Truman goes one step further. Under the direction of Secretary of State Marshall, the United States decides to help finance the recovery of Western Europe.
It is a difficult program, but there's no doubt whatever in my mind that if we decide to do this thing, we can do it successfully.
For the next year, the battle for Europe is fought with freighters rather than destroyers, with tractors instead of tanks.
The seeds of totalitarian regimes reach their full growth when the hope of a people for a better life has died. We must keep that hope alive.
Program by program, speech by speech, Truman lashes together the free nations of Europe into a new coalition, one he hopes will be strong enough to break the tide of communism sweeping across the continent. Stalin responds aggressively in Berlin, a city deep inside communist-held Germany. After the war, the Allies divided Berlin. American, French, and British troops occupy the western half. The Soviets hold the east and control all roads, rail lines, and rivers leading to Berlin. On June 24, 1948, Stalin orders them closed. The blockade is a hostile move to force out the Western Allies, but Truman does not blink. We stay in Berlin, period. 2 million people live in West Berlin. Without new shipments, its food, fuel, and medicine will run out within a month. To avoid disaster, Truman must act quickly. He decides to take a risk. Supply Berlin by air. He orders servicemen alongside American allies to fly unarmed planes directly over Russian guns. If they shoot, he knows it could start World War III. He gambles that they won't. But the cost is immense. Stalin believes that Truman will fold. He doesn't, and the flights continue. Finally, after almost a year, Truman's persistence wins out. Stalin yields and lifts the siege. But West Berlin remains an isolated democracy behind the Iron Curtain. The Berlin airlift helped cement Truman's new alliance. But across Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world, the line between democracy and communism grows more rigid, more contentious, and more deadly. Under the constant threat of nuclear destruction, the world emerges into a tense, uncertain stalemate and is gripped by a new kind of war, a Cold War.
Truman ran for election in 1948. That was the famous Dewey versus Truman election where the newspapers had written Dewey defeats Truman. So if you've ever seen that one, obviously that included Truman. That was 1948. So Truman actively participated in operations here at the library. He personally trained museum workers, had impromptu press conferences for school students. He'd arrive before the staff and often answer the phone because he was the only person working. He would tell surprise callers that he was Harry Truman. Must have been a pretty fun deal if you were calling in to get directions to the museum. Other presidents that came while he was here was Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. And then after he passed away in 1972, Presidents Ford, Carter, and Clinton visited, as well as nominees John Kerry and John McCain.
The question of communism is in no way related to this inquiry, which is an attempt to get control of the screen and to invade the basic rights of American citizens in all fields. The question here relates not only to the question of my membership in any political organization, but this committee is attempting to establish the right.
The Korean War was also started while he was in office, and this little display shows how many soldiers were involved in that war. You can see how many the United States had on down through all the countries. Can you guess which one will be at the end with the smallest amount? There it is, Luxembourg with 44. And we're towards the end of the inside main part of the museum here, talking about Truman leaving office. I'm showing about, I don't know, maybe half of the displays, so there's definitely a lot more. And you can spend hours and hours here checking this out. And then they return to Independence there after they left the White House. This mural was painted by Thomas Benton called Independence and the Opening of the West. It took 3 years to complete, and it was painted right here. I think this used to be the entrance to the museum. Kind of changed it around a little bit now, and there is the recreation of the Oval Office. I believe this was the first presidential library to do this, so if you've seen more modern ones, they've all took that idea here from the Truman Library.
Welcome to this historic institution. You're very welcome. This is Harry S. Truman speaking. This room is an exact reproduction of the presidential office on the west wing of the White House as it was in the early 1950s. The furniture, the rug, the drapes are duplicates of those used in the White House when I was President of the United States. The pictures you see on the wall and the things you see on the desk are those I had in the White House.
And that's the end of our tour on the inside. Let's head out. And this is where Truman, his wife, Bess, and their daughter and her late husband are interred. You see all the flags here. Those are all 50 United States flags. One of the last things to see here is Truman's office. So when the library opened in 1957, he transferred his office from Kansas City to this facility and said he worked 5 or 6 days a week. He would write articles, letters, and he wrote his book, Mr. Citizen, while he was here. And we'll take a glance over here at his office, and it appears today just as it did when he passed away on December 26, 1972. Just down the road from the library, this is where Truman would have lived from when he was about 11 till 17, basically through high school. It's been changed significantly, renovated obviously, and but this would have been the location and the house of where they lived. And then a short drive down the road through the neighborhood, and you can see a lot of similar type houses. And this is where Truman and his wife, Bess, would have lived in 1919, starting in 1919 when they were married. And this is a National Historic Site. You can get tours of this house. I did not on that day, but if you want to, you can tour the house inside. We're in downtown Independence. There's the county courthouse. The statue of Captain Harry, so when he would have been in the military. They have a couple different statues here. We'll show you around. Got an old movie theater behind him, and then you can see the courthouse here that Truman would have had kind of redesigned when it was built. And there's the courthouse, 1933. So it was in this area since 1828. And obviously this is where a lot of the explorers would have started when they did the Oregon Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, California Trail, places like that. This would have been the starting point here in Independence. So just down the block, there's a store called Wild About Harry. I thought I'd better go check that out. Kind of a store of random things. There's sports things to buy. There's Harry Truman themed articles of clothing and little posters. I like that one with the trails and Harry Truman on it. Of course, you can buy one of the famous hats that he wore. And basically right next to that store, there's a little statue of him as a kid. This is where he had his first job in Clinton's drugstore. So it's not a drugstore anymore. It's like a soda shop or ice cream shop. They have candy, different items, but this would have been an old drugstore where Truman had his first job as a kid. I did not sample the ice cream, so maybe somebody else can comment about if it's homemade or if it's just normal, regular old ice cream. I'm guessing it's pretty good, but there's some nice photos of Independence history and Truman on the walls here. And just down the street is the Harry Truman Visitor Center, which is kind of like a visitor center for the city of Independence, but they do have some Harry Truman memorabilia, some actual items from his life there. So there's a nice shot of the building, and sometimes outside the building you could meet up for a wagon ride for some more history about Independence. There's a good shot of Truman in front of the courthouse. Hope you enjoyed this tour. Definitely a lot to see in Independence, and this is only the Harry Truman stuff, so if you ever come to Independence, you have plenty to be entertained with. Today I'm in Independence, Kansas. I'm in Independence, Missouri There is an Independence, Kansas, but it ain't here.